so nice to see everybody. I have to admit that there's so many of you here I don't know because you're fans of the readers today. So welcome to Headmistress Press and our presentation of our triple book launch. So I'll tell you a little bit about Headmistress Press. I'm Risa Denenberg and one of the co-founders and editor at Headmistress Press with Mary Merriam. It's really just the two of us. And I'm going to be your host today. Headmistress was founded by Mary and myself in 2013 with the goal of publishing books of poetry by lesbians, including lesbian, bi, and trans women. And I just looked and counted. We've since published 66 books and chapbooks. And for the past 6 years, we've published an annual set of lesbian poet trading cards. Honoring lesbian poet voices, past and present. Leslia, who's reading today, is one of our trading card poets. I was thinking as I was getting ready to host a Zoom program, I've been an audience at so many of them, that I was a little nervous. And so I just wanted to say how much I appreciate people who do these regularly. I'm thinking of Sandy Yanone, who hosts our program, The Collectibles, thank goodness. And her weekly program is Cultivating Voices Live. And I just think of Kai Coggin, who has hosted the Wednesday night poetry reading from Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas for many, many years. They make it look so natural. You should check out their programs too. They do wonderful readings. So today we are launching 3 poets and their new books, all published in January. We've got Bonnie Morris. Her book is Earlier Households. Jessica Jopp. Her book is The History of a Voice. And Leslia Newman. And her book is I Wish My Father. Just to let you know, we have 4 more Headmistress Press poets who will be launching their books on March 6th, including the winner of the 2020 Charlotte Mew Prize and the finalists from that contest. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our upcoming programs at the end of today's reading. Of course, you can buy our poets' books. You probably can buy them directly from the poets, but you can also buy them at the Headmistress Press's bookstore, which will post the site for you. And please check out our store. We have our 66 books and the lesbian poet trading cards there for you to look at, and these books that you'll be hearing from today. As far as housekeeping, I just want everybody to stay muted, please. Background noise, everybody can hear it. And you're welcome to put comments and praise in the chat box throughout the whole program. But if you have a question for one of the poets, please direct chat it to me and then let me know who the question's for. And we'll see if we have time after the readings to take a few questions. So welcome everyone and enjoy the reading. I know I'm going to. I'm going to read our poets' bios, starting with Bonnie. Bonnie's book was tapped by Mary Merriam for publication with Headmistress Press, and she was certainly onto something. Here's Bonnie's bio. Bonnie J. Morris is a women's history lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley, a finalist for the 2020 Excellence in Teaching Prize, and a nationally recognized expert on the role of women's music and culture. The author of 17 books, she has devoted more than 30 years to documenting the women's music movement, first by publishing Eden Built by Eves, which was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award, and more recently, The Disappearing L, Erasure of Lesbian Space and Culture, and as a co-author of The Feminist Revolution, The Struggle for Women's Liberation. Her research on women's music, Olivia Records, and American lesbian culture will one day be housed at the Radcliffe Institute Schlesinger Library. In recent years, Dr. Morris won a DC Arts and Humanities grant and a writing residency in Wales. She organized the first ever exhibit on the women's music movement at the Library of Congress, arranged for Olivia albums to be a part of the Smithsonian, received the Ruth Rowan Believer Award from the National Women's Music Festival, and accepted the exciting role as Olivia Records' official historian and archivist. Dr. Morris has been a featured speaker at conferences and museums throughout the country and continues to profile women's music history for the Smithsonian. As a fiction writer, she also published the time travel novel, Sappho's Bar and Grill, which was a finalist for the Forward National Award in LGBT fiction and a winner of the Devil's Kitchen Award from Southern Illinois University. Coming soon, a history of women's sports, which will be titled What's the Score? And Earlier Households is her first chapbook. Her first full-length collection of poems, The Schoolgirls Atlas, won the Finishing Line Press's New Women's Voices Prize. What an amazing bio. Everybody welcome Bonnie, and Bonnie, you take it away.
I'm exhausted listening to everything that I've done. Those of you who know me well know that I'm also an avid journal keeper, and here is volume number 195, still writing with a fountain pen. And I'll share with you that much of my poetry has been about environments, the settings behind a relationship or a moment. And I wanted to begin today with a sample of the kind of poetry I've written that's set in a particular environment. And this was in my first little volume, The Schoolgirls Atlas. I'm going to read today from the new book, Earlier Households. But here's just an example of something earlier, and it's called The Triggerfish. And it's about an affair I had in New Zealand, very expensive relationship, flying back and forth across the ocean. It happened that I met you at Volcanoes, and we started in New Zealand. Between bookends of sea and sky, I met you on my way to swim with dolphins, cupped your face in my two palms as though dipping my hands in water. And the bird calls from those cliff sides all sighed, yes, please, yes, please. And hours passed in that way, the Tasman Sea a spray across our skins. Then cold winds brought on winter, but I came to life entirely, tucked close around your left hip, left thigh, your arm, your leg, your throat, warm, warm. I had no beef with you, but distance, the cost of half the world. Airplanes took me away from you, then to you, away from you again. I'd leave sucked dry like a feijoa fruit, my pulp so touched, so gone. Now I meet you in Hawaii underwater, the grains of sand between our teeth, reminders of our pastimes, going down with mermaids, the grit of pleasure, ocean as an orifice. Our lips clench daily on our molded plastic snorkels, breathing underwater, everyone's last dream of heaven's privilege. Our bodies later semicolons, me pressed to you, you unsure of the story. I whisper that the story runs into the sea, like all authentic tributaries, collecting silt and petals, polishing pearls, and thus we roll out of bed into the surf, sea turtles suspended, and our own separate agendas. The heaviness in the air, the density of bread, the slope of your nose. It begins to rain, sending up dust from the black sand. The beach soaks up the storm, the weeds drip, the rocks batter, and the awkward stormlight shows fair upon your half-closed, half-bright eyes. Goose flesh on your wrists, the strong latch of our mouths, clamping gently, a swelling rolling motion, as powerful as the current we've dove into. You can ride this story like a wave, I say. That's a taste of the kind of poetry I wrote for a long time. And I don't mind admitting that a long time ago, I had a girlfriend who said, "You're just with me because you like writing about me and the places we go." And I was like, well, hey, well, actually. And more recently, with great pleasure, I am here to launch the book Earlier Households. That is the famous photograph by Donna Gottschalk on the cover. And Earlier Households is something I really wanted to put together. As the title suggests, these are all pieces from across my adulthood, and actually beginning in childhood, where the setting is not so much a spectacular volcano, but interiors. This is a very interior collection, and it looks at both who I was and what the homes were that I came from and visited in, loving many different people. So starting when I was very young, I wanted to read a bit about the first girl I ever wrote a love letter to. Actually, it was my babysitter. This would be the second, I should say. And this is called Romantic 1971. Whither thou goest, I will go. Some have to, some don't get to. That's why my Jewish mother prepares to follow my father to a distant East Coast job. It's why I want to stay behind with my new friend. The LA airport gate, now mom is weeping. This her California wrapped in luggage. Yet I am at a payphone dialing. And who gave me a dime? It doesn't matter. How'd I get her number? Oh, she had mine, knowing, sensing. I'm dialing up the cute girl from my classroom, 1 year older, saying, "This is it. We're moving. Last chance I have to talk to you." Oh, curled in that booth, that private phone space tabletop, me breastless up against its curve, my family shouting, "Bon, we're boarding." My mouth open, the last I'll ever speak to her. All of my hallmarks spilling, romantic, memoir writer. I could have said, "So long, I have to go." Instead, I scream, "Goodbye forever, and don't forget to write." And I slam it down before she can refuse to write, refuse the invitation. My mother crying on the jetway, my heart racing. I'm crushed out, dazed. And by the way, I'm 10, bucktooth, chubby, fake Hawaiian moo, gifted, hopeless. But on that phone and in my mind, a dashing foreign correspondent, hero to my princess, exiled now. That was to Ariane Dickinson. Where are you now, Ariane? Moving ahead, as my lovely guest, Jennifer Jopp, will recall, I spent 6 years in Binghamton, New York in graduate school. And while there, we all lived in wonderful, cheap little apartments, mostly on the West Side, and each one had a character. And I visited many different friends in these character-packed apartments. And I had one that had wonderful windows all the way around and space enough to have intimate conversations. And this one is called Your Keys. So by now I'm not 10, I'm 23. Grieving takes years, but learning your stories took only one night. Recognition grew from your drinking glass, your flipped bottle caps, keys I still find scattered and suspended, tossed around my sunroom, winking. Listen, the delicate point of your upper lip against the air that moved as soft as water, like a tunnel through which comfort rode, quiet as wool and close as my own outline. There in that beginning, you were perfect. Cautious as anemones and whiskers, fine as grains of sugar left to linger in the breakfast bowl. I watched it all, took notes, expecting nothing. I gave no one a chance to read my mind. I stood up stammering or sat down telling stories. When it ended, no one but a writer could hear the pinpoint hammer, the precise line of a boundary, the paragraph snuffed out like candlewick. I blamed my age then, born to be divided, my life halved in 2 centuries. This one, that. And This is for Leslie, who so kindly extended a blurb to the back cover of my volume, and we're all excited to hear her later. Many years ago, but after I had finished grad school, incredibly, I taught at Harvard Divinity School for a year, and while there, often went to readings at Crohn's Harvest. And I was in a book that included my poem on Jewish identity that I read that evening, and Leslie was in the audience and walked toward me saying, "Who are you?" That's in this volume now, and it's called A Night on the Sabbath Bed, a nod to a little bit of two Jewish girls together. When I am your Sabbath queen, I come through your window full of myself, so full of bearing, caught then, big and laughing, over the kitchen embers, leaving you blessings where you could find them. And on your bed, I wear my hair as it once was in childhood, long for braiding, and you take flowing lumps of it and knot it to your will. My head skin prickling with desire, hair that stands on end for you, alive, blood pounding lightly at the nape of my neck. So braid me loosely from your amused distance, your adoring closeness, the noble proximity of your pomegranate breasts that roll out of the desert into this dream. From that same tribe, we trace our bloodlines back to Egypt, where our dark foremothers shaped the bricks for pharaohs. And I see your Jewish face in mine, a lantern I can walk by. Your history spells my own in a rough and supple kiss. If once we played as goddesses, as Sabbath queens, I know in you tonight each spice of that once womanly Eden, a promised land weighed and measured temptingly. So count them and eat. Your carob eyes, your chocolate hair, your pale brown skin like cinnamon, your ginger voice, your nutmeg laugh, your smoky taste like hazelnuts, like chicory, like cardamom. I am a merchant sampling spice. I am a gardener of delights, a compass point to seasoning, a table set for holidays. Here on the bed, grind spice for me, your fingers, lashes, savory skin. 4 questions aren't enough when we are wise and foolish, descendant first, then ancestor. Here, lean back, and I remember you, the points of touch as asterisks shining in the dark. Whether we are parallel or linear, plotting on a graph how close we are, how distant. And climbing out of the bath tonight, early, rosy in face and fortune, I bent to towel your legs dry and waited as you combed your springy head. I pulled on soft and faded garments, ambling barefoot over the wooden planks of my treehouse, and I let myself land like a marlin on the surface of your quilt, my damp arms thrown akimbo laughing, and pulled you down to kiss your glad eyes with my open mouth. The moon moved over, one brief glimpse per hour, yellow for autumn, and I took your head in my long hands and said, "Bless me, Rebecca," and rocked to the rhythm of your well-known face. Woo, getting a little warm in here, no? Everyone having a good time? um, okay. We're approaching Super Bowl Sunday, which normally wouldn't be remarkable in terms of lesbian history, but this piece is called "The Dust of Gods and Goddesses." And this won a Nimrod Prize, and last summer it was stapled to a totem pole in my neighborhood that had an installation for the pandemic. All of the poets living locally taped poems to a series of poles that people could walk past and look at. I wrote this a bunch of years ago when I was dusting around my altar on Super Bowl Sunday, and I thought everyone would enjoy that for this weekend. The Dust of Gods and Goddesses. Super Bowl Sunday, and I'm missing my dad, thinking about his dying time, the game we watched, all betting on the Saints. They marched in toward my father that last time. And while the city waits tonight to rip into the chips and pop the beer, in this cool pre-game silence, I am dusting round the altar where I keep my father's ashes and some sacred stones, down on my knees in ski pants for the careful swipe of pledge around my father. And it's a mess, the clutter from my travels to the God spots of the world, the goddess pockets. That bottle, steamed with water, holds 6 ounces from the Amazon. Those eagle feathers fell to earth, to forest floor, to me as I sat praying on a stump in Haida Nation, where I took some ashes, more of Dad. It took permission from 2 Haida carvers, then a roaring seaplane over islands, 7 hours hiking to a tree in a white graveyard where I left dust of my father in a fallen eagle's nest. Now he can feel the wings that brush the whole Pacific Rim, the oldest growth, the breakaway that tipped the continent, the Haida Gwaii. I dust around the feathers. Then that bowl, a bowl of stones from Delos. That's Artemis and Isis, a rock that bit my sneaker on a goddess tour. These tiny bits that chafed my shoes, then pebbled in my pocket to take home. And full of dust, so much now, I head into the kitchen to run water on my sacred stones. I'm laughing. Other households now have fans and girlfriends also in the kitchen, but making up the trays of sacred snacks, uncorking bottles, ladling out the salsa, hovering at ovens puffed with biscuit, redolent of game day manliness. I have to be the only one who's washing goddess rocks. Too late, I watch the dirt of ages dribbling in my sink like ordinary coffee grounds. So casual, revealing that one stone I'd never washed before is notched with pattern, ancient overlay. This is a piece of temple floor, a tile. I'm scrubbing with a kitchen spoon, domestic archaeology. My spoon will taste of goddesses forever, though later, when I watch the Super Bowl, this spoon of Isis will contain just hummus. And the game day whistle blares. I'm covered now in dust. My father in my hair, my goddesses. The tile of Artemis is drawing on a paper towel, while deep below the city, in the pipes and sewers of this week of snow, of game day, of snot from winter colds, of pregame flushing, and baths of babies, and the president, the dust of Artemis is flowing too, beating out a pathway to the tidal mouth of river, the lonely voyage eastward back to Delos from the Potomac River. My hands are stained with blessings. Now I turn to catch the modern gladiators clashing, a spectacle of warriors at play. My house is clean. My hair is full of history. My father, feathers, Isis stones, swept free of modern dust tracked in by me, the living. But in the night and far below, Potomac water, carrying the memories and secrets of our saints. Wow. I think I have time for one more short one. And it's such a pleasure to be with all of you today. Okay, this is just for fun. Sounds in the middle of the night. One night I made a list of different sounds that woke me while I slept beside some women I had loved. My list said rain, then barking dogs. It grew apace. Hawaiian roosters, parrots, garbage trucks, tornado warnings, that flamenco dancer in apartment 309 upstairs rehearsing, lightning storms at festivals, your feet racing for shelter, toward me running. A phone call once, just teasing me. Don't miss your flight, she said, knowing I was with somebody else. Your kid in the next room demanding, what are you women doing? Too young to understand. The thunder that we thought might be bombs falling. We woke up with hearts pounding. The rival who came knocking at the door. I hid in your old bathrobe. Better though, the train sounds in the night. Distant, holy, so symbolic. The train entered a traffic tunnel, howling. It woke us up. I had to enter you. Thank you. And I'll stop there. Many, many thanks, gratitude, and blessings to Headmistress Press. This is Earlier Households, the cover photographed on a Gottschalk. Lots of love to everyone.
Wow. Thank you so much, Bonnie. That was just so luscious. Thank you. I'm sure everybody enjoyed that. Whew. So we are moving on to our next reader. Our second reader today is Jessica Job. Jessica reached out cold to Headmistress Press through a friend of mine. And I think they're both on screen today. It takes guts to do that. Working with Jessica, I find her to be modest and unassuming, which is why, as I introduce her, I want to tell you that I fell in love with this book. So let me read Jessica's bio, which in part recounts a history of this book that is amazing. Jessica Jopp received the Baxter Hathaway Prize in Poetry from Epoch for The History of a Voice. This work has been a finalist 5 times for a National Poetry Prize, most recently in 2019, when it was a finalist for both the Prairie Schooner Book Prize and the Honickman Prize from the American Poetry Review. Her work has appeared in many journals, among them Poetry, Seneca Review, and The Progressive. She teaches in the English department at Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania. I'd like to add that I think that poets everywhere are really grateful to hear a story like this. The persistence, knowing that your book is something really special and it just makes it almost to the top time after time. And I just want to say we're so glad we got it. We're so happy to publish this book. So take it away, Jessica. It's all yours.
Thank you, Risa. That was wonderful. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Mary and Risa, for coordinating all of this. And Bonnie, that was wonderful. I can't wait to have your book in my hand and to read more slowly, linger over your images. And Leslie, I'm excited to hear your work soon. I'll be reading from The History of a Voice, and I'll just say a little bit about the organization of it because it's a little bit unusual, just to kind of give you some bearing here. One of my blurb writers, Margaret Gibson, refers to it as one long poem, and it can indeed be read as a single poem. It's in 10 parts, and the 10 individual sections are titled. Within those 10 parts, there are smaller units, of course, and those are numbered. So it's in 10 parts. Could be one whole poem, or could be open to any page, and there's a standalone poem. I'll read the smaller units, of course, and those don't have titles, they're numbered, right? But I will tell you which section of the book I'm reading from. And in choosing what to read today, I chose ones that are representative of narrative threads. There are several storylines running through the whole book, and the ones I chose will kind of give you a sense of what some of those concerns are as I read through. And you will hear my love of meter. There are some sonnets in here. There's one I'm reading a little bit later. You'll get a sense of the narrative concerns. And for each of the 10 sections, there's a title poem. So a poem in that section from which the title is taken. And I'll also indicate to you when I'm reading a title poem. The first section I'm reading from is actually the third section of the book. And it is called What the Moon Is. And this is actually the title poem from that section. Or the moon is something Orpheus, trying to distract his grief, plucked out of the air and rolled in his fingers. He studied its chalky rivers, its canyons of charcoal shadows. He sang to it, and it held him for a while. But then the moon too became familiar. He put the moon back to hang in the pause of dusk, before the stars had chiseled out their shine. He could not look at it. He wandered. Or the moon is another ship like the one on which we float in the sun's slip. From here it looks as if it's fitted out with empty decks that echo light and a hull that's filled with mercury or pearl. The moon is beautiful. Sometimes I wake to find it sailing past, and I turn back into sleep as if I know my hold is packed with time. And I'm going to read one poem from the next section of the book, and this is also the title section, title poem from this section. And this part of the book is called A Dresser Key. There are moments when it comes behind us huge, a vagrant doom, huge and fine as fever, fine as fever when it rises along the stem in the back of our brain, seeps its dark blossoming along the damp haunts. It is huge, surprises, but when we turn to face it, turn to look it in the eye and watch it burn, look for the exact place of you must die, just then it prisms into particulars, harmless. The brain holds one at a time. Particular, the angle of a pen or the black of someone's hair, a green lamp or a dresser key, fine and small and constant and bright, says, it can't be, it cannot be. I'm going to read a couple poems from a section of the book called A New World Sail. And this one, I'll describe the place. It's in reference to my mother's recovery many years ago from a serious illness. There are many poems I've written about her death. Those are in another book, but not in this one. In this one, there's a recovery. And it's the setting was her house in Ithaca, and she had many gardens. She had herb gardens, flowers. She could really grow anything, vegetables. And she lived a few miles out of town, and there's a big field across the road. So this is the title poem from this section called A New World Sail. It's been 6 weeks since my mother has been outside. She's recovering. I wrap her sweater around her, and we amble down the driveway arm in arm. Her dusky towers of lavender guard jagged basil, and globes of chive rest in dark October soil. The cold, slow roots of cherry trees, startled again by March, will stir, each branch to hang red planets by July. From ragged alfalfa waves across the road, white birds snap up like a new world sail. We hold our breath a moment watching them, forget we came outside to get the mail. And this poem is from the same section. One of the narrative threads or storylines is about romantic love, and this is one of those. When my lover kissed me, her mouth raised in me the voices of women bending to a sun-splintered river, weighted with soiled clothes. And it raised a Spanish aria hovering at breaking point, heard through a high single window, the streets damp with slate blue rain. When she kissed me, her mouth drew from me the sigh of a schoolgirl watching blueberries, purple awash of milk on her spoon. She raised from me these voices, and every one was like a prayer in another tongue I gathered long ago, not knowing from whom. This part of the book is called A Line of Poplars. And I'm going to read 2 poems from this section. I've written several for my father, and this is one of my favorite ones that I've written for him. It's based on something that he told me. I don't remember how old I was. I might have been in my early 20s when he mentioned this to me. My father said the moment came when he, about 14, was walking the wet April ground of Washington Park in Albany and saw a large dark workhorse standing leisurely before it hauled the next carriage tour around. He realized when he watched its rhythmic jaw grind a pull of muddy grass, the bones beneath the brown coat fluid and exact, its great bell heart thudding, that since the horse must someday die, then he would too. No magic stones were there on which to rub away the fact, no God to tell him otherwise. Just the coarse straw beneath his feet just his imagining the barn from which the horse had come, a bit hanging in the stab of sun that crossed the stalls and wooden loft. Just his imagining that was enough to wholly make of it a place with grain and water, nothing lost. And I'll read one more poem from this section. And the setting of this is Binghamton, actually. Poems don't stay in discrete units of thematic concern, right? So this is a bit of an overlap between the grief, sadness part and the romantic, Okay. Because I missed my lover, I had to walk along the Susquehanna. I did not have North Africa or any other place so large she was not in it. Every day I followed the river from one end of the city to the other. I gave up the river for the tracks of green and white Burlington Northern cars and the rusted orange main line called the Pine Tree Route. And the thunder of the trains wouldn't do, and not their washed out green and red, and not their names, Southern Pacific, Illinois Central, Delaware, and Hudson, and not the huge blue Conrail, bins of coal rumbling south, but a bright faceless penny someone laid down on the rail. I touched it with my mouth. I'm going to read 3 poems from the next part of the book. We're up to section 9. This section is called A Small Chipped Ring. And one of the narrative threads that runs through the book is grief at the death of a friend. And I will read 3 from this section that are about that circumstance. Since my friends become all spirit, I'll be more sunlight moving through thick watered vines whose shadows lace the white walls of my room. And I will be more fluid, be more rain, wash drain pipes, windows, yards, abundantly the purple foxglove bed. I'll be more pears hung bruised with ripeness among startled white, floating from branches in a wind. And I'll find more of her in me, in the stunned part, staring like a brush animal, and the part of me that lies down in the yard in an August storm saying, come take me, gusts empty me and let me start again. And since we carry our demise in us, star particles waiting to return, she is the part of every cell that will be ash. I will slow down for a time when a particle moves in a kingdom of dust on the painted windowsill. Cities, civilizations come, then everyone goes, the empty town dusted and still. And driven there in summer nailed hard and fast by steel heat of one time, one dust, one wood, I will go down to a dry riverbed, study skulls, petroglyphs, find a way to be of one substance unfaltering, the dust, the sun, the sill for one time, my tongue choked out by loss to sing as dust or wood or in any other form, which has a song I don't yet know, but will find somewhere, one whole and deathless thing. Whew. And the next poem I'm going to read from this section is the title poem from this part of the book, A Small Chipped Ring. And this is a sonnet. I thought her death would make me closer to things, Pain would split me wide like a purple gentian, and I'd know then the fizzled inside workings of stars, what dies at a lake's black bottom. I'd know why the Nautilus echoes the sea's bone beds, why its mouth, pressed to an ear, would want to speak to us. I thought I'd know, but sometime since her death, I'm farther away than I used to be from vibrant stars and suns and backyard grass. The seafloor drags itself away from me. Nightshade turns aside when I pass. Sometimes I feel like nothing, or just a small chipped ring dropped under a pew by a schoolgirl, forgetting everything. And the last section of the book is called I Hear an Aria. And I will read, let's see, 3 from this section. There are several in the book about my sisters, and I'm happy that they are both here today, as well as my dad. And this is one I especially really, I don't know, the wonderful little details of our childhood that I am very near and dear to me, I guess. For the sake of the days, my sisters and I kept frogs. We made up a whole town in the basement with a river running through it. We all lived on the same side of the river. We had to swim across to get groceries or go by rowboat. We ran a bookstore too. For the sake of the days, we would not share clothes, would hide in the willow or in the fort, would cry, punch holes in jars, experiment. Then would share clothes, share compasses, keychains, notebooks and pencil boxes, hairbrushes and belts, or trade shells for rocks, rings for paintbrushes. Would make up recipes, have teas, keep patterns pinned and half cut for a rainy day project. I kept paper scraps, my teeth, insect wings. We walked to town for fireballs and gum. We wore capes when it rained and walked along the moors in the yard. We spoke in every language. There are a few in this book that are really short. This is one of the very short ones in the book, and this is the title poem from this section of the book. I hear an aria. The only parts I don't understand are the words. The ascents of sadness I recognize. The sky is hollowed out, the notes shaken clear. Something was broken. It must be the healing I hear. And I will close with this poem, which is very near the end of the book. Jupiter hangs in the high-pitched, flinted blue above January cornfields, a lens, not close enough. And just below the far town lights of the dinner hour are coming on, and street lights loop down the long road like lighted buoys across the darkening harbor. Whatever I said to damn this world, those times doubled down from weight of love or from some lack. Whatever it was I said, I take it back. I take it back. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Jessica. I loved hearing you read your words.
Thank you.
As I'm about to introduce our third reader, Leslia, I just am struck by how different the three voices that we're hearing today are. How wonderful the range, how wonderful lesbian voices are. So we move on. A little comment about Leslia. Mary and I were just thrilled when Leslie approached us as publisher for what turned out to be the first of her now 3 Headmistress Press publications. She's well known and well loved for her many, many, many books. And particularly, we appreciate, as I'm sure everyone here does, how her work over these years honors the LGBTQ experience. It's just remarkable. Thank you. So here's her bio. Leslia Newman has created 75 books for readers of all ages, including the poetry collections, Still Life with Buddy, October Morning, A Song for Matthew Shepard, I Carry My Mother, I Wish My Father. And those are companion books that we publish both of. You're going to hear from I Wish My Father today. In addition, she is the author of many children's books, including the children's classic Heather Has Two Mommies, Gittle's Journey, An Ellis Island Story, Quetzal, the Cat Who Composed, and Sparkle Boy. Her literary awards include poetry fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Massachusetts Artists Foundation, 2 National Jewish Book Awards, 2 American Library Association Stonewall Honors, and the Massachusetts Book Award. From 2008 to 2010, she served as the Poet Laureate of Northampton, Massachusetts. She lives in Western Massachusetts with a very tender butch and a very bossy cat. Leslia, I'm so happy to introduce you today and so looking forward to your reading.
Thank
Take
you,
it away.
Risa. Thank you, Risa. That was really lovely. Before I read, I just want to say, express my gratitude to Headmistress Press for taking me on, for giving my poetry a home, for spotlighting lesbian poetry, which is so important, and for not only creating beautiful books, but creating an amazing community. I mean, I really feel part of a community, and that is no small thing. So that is absolutely wonderful. I'm actually going to read a little bit from I Carry My Mother. Here is the Exhibit A. Before I read from I Wish My Father, because my parents, the books really go hand in hand, I like to say. Like, oops, is that right? Nope. The books go hand in hand the way my parents went hand in hand for 63 years. So I feel like in a way they're almost one work, even though they're very different, because the book about my dad picks up where the book about my mom left off. And I couldn't get it together to do a little slideshow, but up above me, you see there are pictures of my parents. I don't know how well you can see them, but I just put them up there so they'd be with us. And I also just want to mention the something about the cover art of these books, because it's so beautiful. So both covers are by Carol Marine, and I love the title of this cover is Work Shoes. Isn't that great? And Carol Marine does a oil painting every day. It's her meditation or discipline. So I admire that so much. And this is called Blue Tie Man, which is amazing because there's a picture of my dad up there wearing a blue tie. He always wore a blue tie because he had beautiful blue eyes. And when I saw both of these covers, I cried. And I knew that they would be the covers of my books. So I'm going to start with just a few poems from this book, which was published in 2015, which was 3 years after my mom died. And all the poems are in form. And when I moved back in with my parents for a little while to help them out, which was, an interesting experience at that age. I was, I guess, in my late 50s at that point. So every night I would tuck my mother into bed. We had a hospital bed for her in the living room. And then I would go upstairs to my childhood bedroom and sit at my childhood desk and write a poem. And so that became the first section of the book, which is a series of triolets called The Deal. The Deal. My mother's doctor tells me here's the deal. She's got 6 months to live, a year at most. His words lodge in my gut, a heavy meal. My mother's doctor tells me here's the deal. I'm very sorry, I know how you feel. But keep your chin up, don't give up the ghost. My mother's doctor tells me here's the deal. She's got 6 months to live, a year at most. She actually lived 18 months. My father strokes my mother's swollen hand, his broken body bent in half with grief. He stares down at his ancient wedding band. My father strokes my mother's swollen hand. This ending is so far from what they'd planned. His face a wrinkled mask of disbelief. My father strokes my mother's swollen hand, his broken body bent in half with grief. And now my mother lets her hair go gray. For 40 years she's kept it curled and dyed. I never thought I'd live to see the day. And now my mother lets her hair go gray. She asked my father what he has to say. Now you're sexy and you're dignified. And now my mother lets her hair go gray. For 40 years she's kept it curled and dyed. And at last it is my mother's final hour. No more second chances, no reprieve. The stench of death is bitter, sharp, and sour. At last it is my mother's final hour. My father has lost every ounce of power. He wipes his runny nose upon his sleeve. At last it is my mother's final hour. No more second chances, no reprieve. And there are several poems in the book that are that give instructions, and they are modeled on poems that were written by Michael LaSalle, who a wonderful gay male poet, and he has a book of poems called Decade Dance, and he wrote a poem called How to Watch Your Brother Die, How to Visit the Grave of a Friend, poems like that. And so this poem is called How to Watch Your Father, Watch Your Mother Die. Sit beside him on a folding chair beside your mother's bed. Place a box of tissues between you. See how he takes your mother's hand in both his and strokes it like a small wounded animal. Do not speak. Do not turn on the TV. Do not shatter the silence around you. Let time pass. Listen to your father sigh. Listen to your father sob. Hand your father a tissue whenever necessary. Ask your father if he wants something to eat. Ask your father if he wants something to drink. Ask your father if he wants to go for a walk. Do not press him when he says no to everything. Remember, the one thing he wants is impossible to give him. Let more time pass. When your father gets up to go to the bathroom and says, "Hold mom's hand," hold your mother's hand. When he returns, give your mother's hand back to your father. It belongs to him. Do not tell your father what the hospice nurse told you. You need to let go so she can let go. When the sun sets, gather the darkened room around your shoulders like a cloak. Watch your father's undying love take your mother's breath away. So my mom died of cancer. She had bladder cancer and she had COPD. She was a lifelong smoker. She smoked from the time she was 14 to the time she was forced to quit because she had to go on oxygen when she was, I think, 78, something like that. But her mind was completely intact and sharp, and she was with it to the end. She directed her own life. My job was to carry out her wishes, even when I didn't think she was making the best choices. But, you know, it was her life. My dad had a very different demise. He was completely well physically. He was playing tennis till he was 88 years old. He was just very, very healthy, but he started having a series of episodes, we called them, which compromised his mind. And so my job was very different. My job was keeping him safe in the world without compromising his dignity, which was very challenging. He was a very proud man, very stubborn man. So I'm going to start actually with the beginning of the book has a little epigraph, which is a poem that my dad wrote for me. It's the only poem he ever wrote in his life. He wrote it for my 60th birthday. He was very proud of it. So I'll read that poem. Science tells us that to live, one needs air and water, but to have a better life, one must have a daughter. To have one so talented, caring, and bright even makes old age all right. So I said, Dad, you missed your calling. You were an attorney. You could have been a great poet. So he loves that. I think he'd be very amused to see now he's a published poet, actually. Okay, so just a note on the form of the poems. All the poems are written in the same form, which is the title also acts as the first line of the poem. So the title goes right into the poem, and then all the verses are 3-line tercets. When my father wakes up on that first sweltering night of that first scalding summer, soaked in sweat like my mother when she suffered those terrible hot flashes 40 years ago, he stumbles out of bed and lumbers to the archaic air conditioner, fumbling for the right button to bring it back to life with a wheeze and a groan and a thump. Next, he shuffles across the faded carpet, slides between the worn sheets, and lifts the torn blanket to cover my mother, who will surely grow stiff from the frigid air blowing between them, as she had for more than 60 years. Who could blame him for forgetting she had left him and was now slumbering on the other side of town, wrapped in a shroud beneath the stony, stubborn ground? How he missed her old, cold shoulder. This is about a shopping trip I took with my dad. He was not that experienced in food shopping, to say the least. My parents had a very traditional marriage. So, yes, we have no bananas. My father croons off key as we stroll through the supermarket. Shall we get some, he asks, a standing joke between us. My father hates bananas, peaches, plums, mangoes, anything mushy makes him shudder in disgust. Remember that time I baked you banana bread? I stop our cart to ask. You loved it until I told you what it was, remember? Really? My father says. Impossible. He backs away from the bananas as though they mean him harm. I don't remember. Sure you do, I insist. I put 3 pieces on a plate and you ate them all. It was the summer before I went off to college. My father steers clear of the bananas and pushes the cart toward the deli. Where'd you go to college again? He asks, placing a package of rugelach into the cart. Vermont, I say, removing the rugelach, which is bad for his diabetes. Don't you remember? We drove up and stopped for lunch at that diner in Montpelier, and the one woman working there was seating people, taking orders, cooking, running the register. And Mom felt so sorry for her, she offered to leap over the counter and lend a hand, remember? At this, my father brightens. Ah, your mother, he says, she could have done it. She could do anything. Almost anything, I correct him. There was one thing she could never do. I reached for a bag of whole wheat bagels. What's that? My father asked, genuinely curious. She could never get you to eat a banana. That's true. My father's chortle dies in his throat. I would eat every banana in the world just to see her one more time, he says. And we both fall silent, make fists around the handle of our grocery cart, and together we push on. One thing that I did a lot with my dad was look at photos of albums of old photos. He really liked talking about happier times, times when he first met my mom, when they first started dating, the early days of their marriage. So that's what this poem is about. Who's that? My father asks, jabbing his thick yellow nail at a thin, willowy woman dressed in a beaded evening gown, staring up at us from the pages of my parents' age-old wedding album. I stare back. I don't know, Dad. Mom would know, I think, but do not say. My father squints, adjusts his cockeyed glasses, brings the heavy book closer to his face. It's you, he says, his voice full of triumph. See, the old man still got a few of his marbles left. That's not me, Dad, I say, hating to deflate him. No? The deep creases in his brow deepen as he lowers the book to his lap, stares at the photo, stares at me. It looks like you, he insists, desperate to be right. Are you sure it's not you? I shake my head. No, Dad, it's not me, I repeat, desperate for him to be in his right mind. This is your wedding album. You got married in 1949. I was born in 1955. My father scowls. The numbers do not add up. Are you positive? He asks sadly. I'm positive, I answer sadly. For more than anything, I want to have been there, to have seen my dreamboat of a dad in his rented top hat and tails, gazing down at my model slim mother in her borrowed veil and lacy gown, to have heard the rabbi's blessing and the smash of the glass beneath my father's foot. I wasn't even a twinkle in your eye, I say, hoping the old cliche will make my father smile. It doesn't. Who is that? He asks again, lifting his eyes toward the sky and rapidly tapping his callous middle finger against his faded, frowning lips. Who indeed? God only knows, but God isn't saying. Is it Cousin Irma? I ask my father, who smacks himself on the forehead. What a dummy, Cousin Irma. Of course that's who it is, he declares, relieved to put a name to the face that looks so much like his clever daughter, who always knows who's who and what's what, and that desperate times call from desperate measures, such as pulling a name, any name, out of a hat, if it will make the worry on her father's worrisome face disappear like magic, as he leans forward and slowly but surely turns another page. So it was very clear that something was happening in my father's brain. So I decided to take him to a neurologist. And this guy turned out to be quite a character in and of himself. So that's what this poem is about. Oh, and this poem, by the way, won the Robinson Jeffers Tour House honor, and it was selected by Marie Howe, who's a poet I admire greatly, so that meant a great deal to me. The first time we visit the neurologist, he gives us exactly 7 minutes of his time. What's 8 plus 15? He asks my father, who gives me a look I know all too well. What is this guy, an imbecile? 8 plus 15 is 23. My father speaks loudly, as if the doctor hears worse than he does. Come on, ask me a real question. My father puts up his dukes and punches the air, eager for a good fight. 8 times 15 is 120. 120 times 15 is 1,800. 1,800 times 15 is 27,000. The poor neurologist has no way of knowing what a math whiz my father is, how he'd entertain us on long cart rides by barking out math problems, or better yet, dare me to challenge him. Hey, Dad, what's 11,327 plus 10,695, I'd ask. 22,022, he'd say in a second, waiting for me to work it out in my notebook. He was always right. Hey, Dad, what's a million plus a trillion, I'd ask, searching my brain for the biggest number in the universe. 1,000,000 trillion, he'd answer. Hey, Dad, what's 1,000,000 trillion plus 1,000,000 trillion? A bazillion, he'd say, shaking his head so fast his cheeks would turn to rubber and I'd crack up. If only we were laughing now, but the neurologist is not amused. He leans forward to study his puzzle of a patient. Where were you born? He asks. Brooklyn, naturally, my father says, as if the doctor should know that anyone who is anyone was born in Brooklyn. What did you do for a living? My father sits up a little taller. I'm an attorney, still practicing. The neurologist looks to me to confirm that either this is true or that my father has gone bananas. Yep, I say, hoping to convey that this is a real problem. The neurologist does not catch on. Who's running for president? He asks my father, who is now convinced that the doctor is completely bonkers. Hillary and that son of a bitch, he bellows, causing the 2 receptionists out front to break into peals of squealing laughter. He's fine. The doctor leans back and glances up at the clock to let me know I've wasted enough of his time. He's great. Take him home. My father is already out of his seat. But what about his delusions, I ask? The men singing in his head, the little boy at the foot of his bed. The neurologist shrugs. Old people have delusions, he says, pulling open his file cabinet's top drawer, clearly done with me and my father, who was already out in the waiting room, waving my coat by the shoulders like a matador, taunting a bull, then hustling me down the hallway. Come on, let's go, shake a leg. Clearly, we have more important things to do than deal with this nonsense. And this doctor, who I know my father thinks is a real nut job and will never again agree to see, not next week, not next month, not in a bazillion years. So here is the turning point. It was not a stroke of genius. It was not a stroke of luck. It was a stroke of misfortune that befell my father, leaving him crumpled at the foot of the driveway next to the garbage, waiting all morning to be picked up. My handsome, elegant father, in his freshly pressed gray wool suit, starched white shirt, easy on the collar, and cranberry juice colored tie, wearing the cufflinks shaped like subway tokens I bought him for his birthday, and spit shiny black Italian leather shoes, freshly showered, cleanly shaven, fingernails carefully clipped and buffed, smelling of ivory soap, Old Spice, Brill cream, Listerine, and Arid extra dry, holding his monogrammed leather briefcase by the handle, off to work at 8 in the morning, returning at 7 in the evening, 6 days a week, 4 weeks a month, 12 months a year for more than half a century. My handsome, elegant father, now dragging an IV pole through the hospital hallway, barefoot, grizzly-chinned, hair like Albert Einstein, sweaty and stinky, wearing a sky blue Johnny dotted with tiny tumbling teddy bears, the back flapping open, every string untied. So my father did recover. We brought him home. It became very clear that he could not keep living by himself. So I hired what we called a housekeeper. She was really more of a caregiver. And then eventually a new chapter opened in my dad's life, which I will read. This is like a transition poem. For as long as I can remember, my father has been a creature of habit. Every morning he rose at exactly 6 a.m., no need to set the clock, jumped into the shower, shaved, slapped his cheeks with cologne, donned a suit and tie, thudded down the stairs, punched in the code to shut the burglar alarm, yanked open the front door, hustled down the driveway, fetched the newspapers, clambered into the kitchen, sat at the head of the table, poured out a bowl of Special K, added 2% milk, filled his world's greatest dad mug with instant Maxwell House laced with sweet and low, skimmed the headlines of Newsday and the Times, gobbled up his cereal, gulped down his coffee, clattered his dirty dishes into the sink, threw on his overcoat, grabbed his leather briefcase, dashed out of the house, punched in the code to reset the burglar alarm, locked the front door, unlocked his Nissan Maxima, started her up, backed her out, and sped to the office arriving before anyone else at exactly 7:45. My father thought this routine would last forever. Why wouldn't it? And cannot for the life of him fathom how quickly he went from husband to widower, attorney to retiree, tennis partner to spectator, driver to passenger, healthy to diabetic, hearing to practically deaf, seeing to practically blind, and if all that wasn't bad enough, now his beloved daughter, of all people, is trying to convince him to go from lifelong New Yorker to new New Jerseyite, from proud homeowner to reluctant resident of what might as well be called God's waiting room. I don't like it. My father puckers up his face and whines like a little boy who has just been presented with a plate of liver and lima beans instead of a colorful brochure exalting the perks of downsizing, the benefits of independent living, and the joys of communal life. I don't like it either. This hurts me more than it hurts you, flows through my mind. But before I can stop myself, I make the calls, send for the paperwork, and lower the shades of the living room window so my father doesn't have to see the green for sale sign blooming on his lawn. So my father actually moved into independent living, which he did not like at all. And this is a poem about what happened when he moved in there. It takes a long time to die, says my father, who is sick and tired of everyone telling him how great he looks. He is almost 90 with a full head of hair and a full set of teeth, and he has kept his girlish figure, of which he has always been immensely proud. Everyone says I look like I'm 60, he gloats. Dad, I'm 60, I remind him. He scrunches up his nose, shakes his head, and flicks his fingers twice, dismissing my words, which can't possibly be true. How can he be old enough to have a 60-year-old daughter? The women are beating down my door, he brags, before rousing himself off his rocker to gather a fistful of notes strewn about the living room. He fans them across his cluttered coffee table. Pick a card, any card, I think, as I read invitations from Doris, Sylvia, Gladys, Marlene, asking him to play bingo, Scrabble, Monopoly, Risk. Dear Mr. N, howdy, new neighbor, from one New Yorker to another. In pristine printing, scribbled script, pen, pencil, even pink ink, the ladies invite my fetching father to take a walk, watch a film, share a meal, drink some tea. So what do you think? I ask him, neatly stacking the notes into a pile on the table next to a teetering tower of junk mail, asking my father for money, beside a mountain of unread law journals and other magazines. My father flicks his fingers again and gives a little snort as if he can't be bothered. The thought of being with a woman other than your mother is repulsive to me, he says stiffly, as though he has rehearsed it. So can I throw these away? I ask, always eager to straighten up his new apartment, a Sisyphean task. Leave them, says my father, the original pack rat who has stashed beneath his bed several shoeboxes of birthday cards and anniversary cards collected over 60 plus years, each one signed by my mother, always and forever. Why do you want them? I ask my father, who shrugs, his new answer to everything. I'll take care of them later, he promises, which we both know means they will remain right here where I dropped them on his coffee table, next to a cigar box full of family photos, an empty bottle of baby aspirin, a cup of tea grown cold, always and forever. I'm just going to read 2 more poems. My father was never on time once in his entire life. We could always count on him being a good 20 minutes early. I remember many a Saturday night with my father dressed to the nines in his slick black tux and glittering diamond studs, pacing the hallway from front door to kitchen to dining room before ordering me to dash upstairs and see what was taking my impossible mother so goddamn long. I'd find her sitting side saddle on a stool in a white silk slip, surrounded by crumpled tissues imprinted with lip prints of lipstick the color of apples, clasping a sparkling bracelet around her wrist, clipping on a pair of matching earrings, and muttering to herself in the bedroom mirror, I know the early bird catches the worm, but who the hell wants a goddamn worm? She'd hand me a pendant shaped like a tear to fasten around her neck, then raised a silver aerosol can, the hairspray hissing like a snake as she circled her head 3 times, forcing me to step back from the cloud that always made me cough. Once, I came home from college for Thanksgiving and my father drove me to the airport for my return flight on a snowy Sunday afternoon. Somehow, my stuffed to the gills suitcase never made it out to the car. After he finished yelling and screaming and carrying on, my father drove us home and drove us back to the airport, and still I was an hour early for my flight. It made me laugh when my father proudly showed me a note he received after my mother died. Dear Mr. Newman, thank you for coming to my bar mitzvah. You were the first one there. I wondered just how early he was and how on earth he would feel to learn that from this day forth, for all time, he will always and forever be known as the late Mr. Newman. And this last poem won the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award honor, which meant a great deal to me since Allen was my mentor. My mother is at the bridge table with Loretta, Gert, and Pearl when my father finds his way to heaven. Sit down, dear, she says, patting the seat beside her and barely looking up from the hand she's been dealt. The game is almost through. But my father is too overcome to sit. He stands and stares at his beloved, free of wheelchair and oxygen tank, happily puffing away on a Chesterfield King held between two perfectly manicured fingers, sipping a cup of instant Maxwell House, leaving a bright red lip print on the white china cup. Her hair, the lovely chestnut brown it was the day they met. Her face, free of worry lines, the diamond pendant he bought her on their first trip to Europe, glittering against her ivory throat. She looks like the star of an old black and white movie who would never give him the time of day, but somehow spent 63 years by his side. I missed you, my father tells my mother, leaning down to kiss her offered cheek. Of course you did, says my mother, who always knows everything. She plays her cards right, and after Loretta and Pearl and Gert fold, she stands to let my father take her in his arms, and in their heavenly bodies they dance. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much, Leslia. That was really lovely. All of these readings have been so special. I wanted to mention, as each of you showed the covers of your books, that they were all designed by Mary Merriam, using mostly always lesbian art. And kind of like Bonnie is really a foremost historian of lesbian music, Mary is really a foremost historian of lesbian art. She knows it through and through and designs these beautiful books. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to ask this question of the readers, and if you have specific questions for any of the readers today, please address them in the chat to me and tell me who you're addressing them to. And maybe we'll have time for a few extra questions after mine. My question is just a question we've all been asking each other and everyone. Tell us how you've been doing over the past year. How has COVID affected your writing, your opportunities for reading, your living situation, your life in general? How are you doing? Bonnie?
Well, I'm in Santa Cruz, California. I am sheltering in place with my 82-year-old mom. And I resonated with Leslia's comments about returning to the family home and writing in a room, or in my case, writing at the dining room table where I learned to hold a fork. The coffee table that still has my teething tooth marks on it. I felt often in the pandemic year terrified that I was going to die. I was going to get COVID and die. And I very methodically went about organizing my manuscripts and rushing to prepare and get in print what I wanted to have in print should I go. And I wrote like a maniac. I wrote 4 books, two of which have publishers, and the other 2 I hope will. But in addition to that sense of urgency and devotion to leaving a certain kind of legacy and getting all my, papers together, I had an amazing experience that I just wanted to answer. We also had a wildfire, and I, of course, live among my archives, and I was given, half a day to take what I valued and load it in our car. And I was evacuated with many other people from Santa Cruz for 8 days and nights, not knowing if our house was going to burn down. And illegally, I snuck back into our neighborhood to take more of my journals into the car after we were forbidden to do so. And when I entered the house, the computer was still on and blinking. And I thought, well, I'll just check my email once while I'm here. And there was the message from Headmistress. Congratulations, your book of poems is going to be published. So at a time when I thought I was going to lose everything, I actually had a future in print, and that meant a great deal to me. So that's one answer to how my year has been. The house did not burn down. Everything's okay, but I now have a go bag packed with my music archives. And that was a very humbling experience for a person whose life is in paper, to actually see wildfire ashes piling up on the railing outside my writing studio and knowing it was time to go.
Wow. Thanks, Bonnie. I'm glad we were a bit of sunlight in your, I mean, we've
Totally.
had, we've had problems here in Washington State too with fires. And it's interesting to me that you were afraid you would die of COVID. And then the fire came. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, why don't we go to Jessica? How are you doing? How are things here?
Well, my story is not going to be dramatic. It's sort of mundane, I guess, in a sense. My relatives are all over the country and I miss them. And that's been one thing personally that's been very difficult because I'm accustomed to seeing them every summer and in the winter, my winter break. So that part has been difficult. There hasn't been much change as far as my writing life, I don't think, or reading opportunities. Those parts have not changed. And I'm fortunate enough to have employment that I can do from home. So I've been teaching on Zoom, which feels, strange. I'm kind of mixed about, I guess, the larger picture, though. There's part of me that, well, I don't know, a week or so ago, I thought of that movie Soylent Green, that dystopian, horrible film. I don't know if any of you remember that. It's people looking at screens, replicas of life. And there's something horrifying about that. And every now and then I get this little clutch. Like, what if this becomes what we know mostly and too comfortable for people? That's something about that is really scary to me, but I can also acknowledge it's wonderful to have this moment with all of you that otherwise Zoom makes this possible, right? So I also acknowledge that. But the optimist in me clings to things like the story I read recently in the New York Times that mentioned all these really poignant stories of people who are reaching out to neighbors in this pandemic, people who they've lived in, the same apartment building for decades with Mrs. So-and-so, and they've never actually talked to each other until now, and now they go on regular walks together. So there's part of me that hopes that out of all of this national mess, there'll be some, some bright spots, right, going forward.
Thanks. I have to second the thing about Zoom. I released a chat book this year too, last year, and had far more people at the reading than I would have had if we had done it locally. And so that was a little boost. Other things, my life hasn't changed that much because I live alone by choice, but I also miss my family. So I kind of connect with that one. So Leslie, how about you? How have you been doing?
Well, first, I just want to say I apologize for turning off my video and turning it back on just now. As Risa said, I live with a very bossy cat, and I had to open the door because she was meowing to see what was going on in here, and then I had to let her out. So there you have it. For me, it's been very mixed because day to day, in some ways, my life hasn't changed that much because I'm self-employed as a writer. I have been a full-time writer for many, many years. But usually I travel, almost every week to give a reading somewhere, and now, I've been married for 32 years. And this is the first year that I have slept in my own bed with my spouse and my cat for 365 days in a row. So, which has been really nice, I must say. So, I don't know if I'll ever go back to traveling the way I used to. First of all, of course, I won't unless it's safe. But even if it is, now that I've stopped being on a book tour since 1986, when my first novel came out, I can't believe I did that, and I'm not sure if I will continue to do that. So like everyone has said, Zoom is a mixed thing. Here we all are. We couldn't all be here because, I live in Massachusetts. Bonnie lives out west. And, it's just, obviously. Emotionally, it's been rough. I've lost some people, including my aunt, Ida, who was 100 to COVID. So, of course, that was very difficult. I have responded by doing a bit of writing about COVID. I've written some poems, and one poem in particular, I personified Corona to see what she had to say, which was kind of interesting. And I spearheaded a project where we had a blog where a local writer, we published a local writer's poem about the pandemic every day, and we got 150 writers. And so we did that as a Western Massachusetts project, and that was very gratifying. And that really helped me, have a sense of community within isolation, give people a chance to express themselves, and give readers a chance to, see what poets were and prose writers were feeling. So those are some of the things. We got a cat, which I'm happy about. It's lovely to be bossed around by a feline goddess. But, I miss so much. I miss my friends. I miss going to plays and poetry readings and restaurants and seeing long distance friends and just being out in the world. It's very strange. But hopefully that will change. My spouse is in the category where she can get the vaccine. She's getting her first dose next week, and I hope to follow not far behind.
Thanks, Leslie. The next collectibles program on February 20th, the third Saturday of every month, and Minnie Bruce Pratt with Naomi Raplansky. We also have invited readers with each of these featured readings. So if you're interested in reading your work at one of these programs, reach out to me to let me know. And you can reach out to me at my email address, which will stick in the chat. Also coming up is another book launch. The Charlotte Mead Prize winners book launch reading is on Saturday, March 6th. It also starts at noon Pacific time, and it will feature the winner and the finalists of our annual chapbook contest. This year, Jillian Ebersole won the contest with The Water Between Us, and our finalists also 3 wonderful books: Sarah Caulfield with a second book with Headmistress titled Discomfort, Catherine Fallon with Demoted Planet, and S.G. Huerta with The Things We Bring With Us, Travel Points. I'm very much looking forward to that reading, and I'll be hosting that as well. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You've been a wonderful audience. I've really enjoyed this reading, as I can see from looking at your faces that you also have very much enjoyed too. So goodbye.